So, you're new and you just installed Alpha 5 and you click the Start button and now you're staring at the Select Workspace dialog box. So what do you do next? Well, watch this video. Hi, I'm Dave McCormick from Alpha Software, and I'm going to take you on a tour of the Alpha 5 interface to help you get oriented. The screen you're looking at right here has got two tabs. There's the News and Updates screen, which tells you what's new, how to get started, and whether there are any updates available to your software. And the second tab is the interesting one, and this is where you'll create a new workspace. So what's a workspace? Well, think of it as an Alpha 5 document where you keep all of the settings and files associated with your application in one organized area. This area is literally a folder on your hard drive, and a special kind of file called an ADB file that acts as a database to keep track of your work. So you begin by creating a workspace, which involves creating a new folder and creating this ADB file. I'm going to do that right now. First, I'm going to tell Alpha 5 the type of applications I want to build. We can just check web and desktop. We don't have to worry about this for right now. Then I'm going to say I want to create a new empty workspace. We'll start by creating a new folder to put that workspace in. Folder My Workspace. And I guess I'll call this My Application. It's the name of my ADB file. I click Save. Okay, so we created a new folder, and in it we created our new ADB file, our workspace. So let's get familiar with the Alpha 5 interface so we can start building an application. And we'll start with the control panel and the Web Projects control panel. Here you see the control panel, but let's open up the Web Projects control panel just by clicking this button here. Now, the control panel plays a critical role when you're building Windows desktop applications. It's the space where you define your data tables, you build your data entry forms, you create reports, and so on. But nowadays, most applications, even ones that are built to run on a Windows desktop computer, are actually built as web applications, meaning they're meant to run inside a web browser. And it's these web, and for that matter, mobile applications that we're going to focus on in this video. And so for us, we'll be spending our time mostly here in the Web Projects control panel. So let's take a look at that now. Okay, so the first thing you might notice on the Web Projects control panel are that there are a series of buttons up here. New, Add File, Publish. And there's also this drop-down box over here. And here you see a list control. And over here, there is another sort of table grid control that right now is empty. So here's how it works. Your application is going to be built using A5W pages, and I'll tell you what those are in a moment. It might also include HTML pages, cascading style sheets, JavaScript files, images, and web components, which I'll also get into in a moment. Now, collectively, you can use these to build any application you can imagine. Now, you probably know what HTML pages are, and you've certainly heard of CSS and JavaScript, even if you aren't a whiz at building or programming. But A5W pages and web components are unique to Alpha 5, so you probably haven't heard of them before. So let's talk about them now. And we'll begin with A5W pages. An A5W page is really just an HTML page, except that you can add XBasic code to it that's run when Alpha 5 serves the page. Or to put it another way, just like a PHP page can run PHP code, and an ASP page can run ASP code, an A5W page runs Alpha 5 code, and we call that code XBasic. Now you're probably thinking, oh boy, I don't know XBasic. Do I have to learn a new programming language to use Alpha 5? Don't worry, you don't. That's where web components come in. Web components are sophisticated, pre-written chunks of XBasic code that you embed right into your A5W pages. So let's go ahead and take a look. So for example, If you want to display or enter data in a database, you don't need to do any programming. You just use a grid or a dialog component. If you want to build a login page, just use the login component. If you want to add mapping capabilities without programming, just use the Google Map component. If you want to add scheduling capabilities, use the calendar component. I think you get the idea. Okay, so let's build our very first simple application. It will consist of just a single A5W page and a grid component. And the function of the application will be to display a list of customers in a database. We're going to start by building the grid component. So we're going to choose Web Components. We'll click the New button. We'll click Next because Web Component is already selected. And Grid is already selected, so we can click Next again. Now here we are at the Select Grid Component template page. And we're given a choice of starting from a blank grid component, or we can create a grid component using a template, which will fill in some of the settings for us. Now, templates can be great time savers, and you can even build your own templates later on. But right now, we're going to choose Start with a blank grid component, and we'll click OK. And that brings us to the grid builder. We'll begin by specifying the overall layout of the grid. Our choices are tabular, where data is lined up in a table, like a spreadsheet, or form, where the field labels are on the left and the data is on the right. And the last choice is stacked columnar, in which you have the first field label, followed by the first field, then the second field label, the second field, the third field label, the third field, and so on. In this example, though, we're going to just stick with tabular. We're going to leave this as read-only, and we're going to leave the rest of the options alone. Now let's go over here to data source, so we can begin to tell Alpha 5 what kind of data source it's going to connect to in order to get its data. Our two choices here are DBF and SQL. You might be familiar with DBF files, sometimes known as DBase files. They're an older file format that were common for desktop databases. Alpha 5 does support DBF tables, but if you're building a new application, we very much recommend that you use a SQL database like SQL Server or MySQL. So we're going to go ahead and click SQL Database. And now we're going to go back over here and click on Query. And we're going to tell Alpha 5 where it can find our SQL data. We're going to do this by creating something called a connection string. If you've done any database work using ASP or PHP, you might already be familiar with the term connection string. But if this is new to you, a connection string is simply a series of characters that tells your web application how to connect to your database. It might sound complicated, but I think you'll find it's not really, and I'm going to walk you through it right now. I'm going to begin by clicking the Add, Edit, Save Connections button. And when the Alpha DAO Connections dialog box appears, I'm going to click New to create a new connection string. And before we build the connection string, we give it a name. I'm going to call mine Northwinds. And the reason I'm doing that is because we're going to use a sample database called Northwinds. If you've ever used Microsoft Access, you might be familiar with that database. Both Access and Alpha 5 include it as a sample for testing. Now I'm going to click Build, and the Create SQL Connection String dialog box appears. Now here you're going to really see some of the power of Alpha 5, because when you click on this connection type dropdown, you'll see a list of native drivers that are already built in for you to use. To name just a few of the popular ones, there's IBM's DB2, there's MySQL, there's SQL Server, there's Oracle, and there are quite a few others as well. So let's imagine for a moment that you already have your data in a SQL Server database, and you want to connect to it. You choose SQL Server, and you tell it what version you're using. Let's say you're using SQL Azure. And then you specify where you can find the database. Now this might be a locally hosted database, which is the default option here. Or you could type in an IP address right here into this box. Or you could type in a URL. And then down here you type in the username and the password to connect to that database. And you'd click OK, and you'd be done. But in this example, we're going to use the Northwinds database. So I'm going to go ahead and choose from the drop-down here. I'm going to choose Access because Northwinds is an Access database. And you'll notice when I choose it, the options here have changed. So instead of specifying an IP address or a URL, we're going to specify a file name because that's how Access works. I'm going to go ahead and say Open File. And like I said, the database is already installed by default when you install Alpha 5. So let's go ahead and find it. If you're taking a look at your C drive, this is where you're going to probably find that. You look under Users, and then I'm Dave McCormick, so this is my user. And I'm going to take a look under My Documents. There's Alpha 5 v11 and MDB files. Those are Access files, by the way. Access files end with the extension MDB. And I'm going to choose Northwind. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to click Test Connection. And sure enough, my connection succeeded. I'm going to click OK again. And OK. Close. And now, in the connection name dropdown, you're going to find my connection string that I just created. And we're going to click Connect. Now we've told Alpha 5 what database we want to use, so next we'll tell Alpha 5 what table we're interested in using. So I'll click the Select button, and I'll choose Customers. We'll leave the other settings on this page alone, and we'll hop over to Fields here in the tree control. Now by doing that, Alpha 5 connects to our database, opens our table, and displays the names of fields in that table right here in the available fields list. Now I'm going to choose the fields we want to see by double-clicking on them. And at this point, we're done with what I'll call the first draft of our component. We can now click the Working Preview tab and see what we've built. Now, this doesn't look very pretty right now, and we'll clean it up in a minute. But what you can see is the data from our customer table is now displayed here inside our grid component. This grid has a few built-in features that I'd like to point out. Starting at the top, you'll notice the names are links, and by clicking a particular link, it will actually sort the data according to that field. At the bottom of the page are navigation controls, which lets you move from page to page. You can go to the first page, a previous page, next page, or last page. And lastly, you can choose how many records you want to display at once on the page using the drop-down records per page here at the bottom. Now, one feature that you can't see just by looking at this grid is that it's AJAX enabled, so it uses AJAX when fetching and displaying records. That doesn't make much of a difference to us with a relatively small database that we're connecting to locally. But with larger databases, and when working over the internet, it means that you're going to have rather snappy performance, like you'd expect from a modern web application. Okay, so like I said, the grid really isn't that pretty. Let's give it some style, and then we'll move on and embed this grid into an A5W page. So we'll click the Design tab, and this time we're going to choose Properties from the tree control. Here's the AJAX enabled setting I was telling you about a moment ago. But what we're looking to do now is select a style sheet for the application to make it look cleaner. So we'll come over here to the Style Name property, and we'll click on the Smart button. The Select Style dialog box appears, and we could choose a style that we like. Alpha 5 lists a variety of built-in styles. The ones with the prefix MOB are meant for mobile applications. They'll choose sizes and fonts that display well on a smartphone or tablet. The one I'm going to choose, though, is Gradient Olive, GR Olive. I'll go ahead and click OK. And now we'll go over to Working Preview. And voila, much better. So at this point, we have our first component built. So we're going to go ahead and save it. We'll just click the Save button, and I'll call it Customer Grid. And we can go ahead and close the grid builder. So notice now that our grid component appears in the Web Components section of the Web Projects control panel. Now to wrap up our little application, we're going to take the web component we built and put it in an A5W page, and then open it in a web browser. So let's choose A5W pages. We're going to click New. We're going to click Next. And we're going to start from a blank page. Now, there are two real views here. You'll see three tabs, but there are two real views here. There is the Wysiwyg View, the what you see is what you get view. And this is the source view, where it just shows you the HTML. You can work in either way you feel comfortable. I'm going to go over to Wysiwyg. I think it'll be easier to show in this example. And we're going to start by putting a title at the top of the page. We're going to call this Customer View. And let's tweak the font a little bit. Let's choose a new typeface. How about Georgia is nice. Let's go with a bigger size. I don't know, 6, 7. That's huge, but that should be okay. And we're going to go ahead and save the page. We'll call this Customer View. And as you can see, it's going to save it as an A5W page. So I'll go ahead and click Save. And we'll move down a few lines. One line should do it. And I'm going to choose Insert Component. So I'll hit the Select button, and you'll see the customer grid that we just created in the previous example is here. I'm going to say don't set the page background. You have a couple of options here for how you want to use the style sheets between the page and the component itself, which one should take precedence. And I'm going to go ahead and save this again. Okay, our page is built and our component is inserted. The next step is to open our page in a web browser and inspect our work. But before we do, there's one button we need to push first, and it's over here. I'll click the Web Projects Control Panel, and I'm going to click the Application Server button. Click Yes, and this turns on the Application Server. What's that, you might ask? Well, again, we'll go back to the analogy of ASP and PHP. You run ASP code on an ASP page with an ASP server, and you run PHP code on a PHP page with a PHP server. So, in order to run Alpha 5 in its A5W page, you need to run it with an Alpha 5 application server. And the Alpha 5 developer software that we've been working with so far also includes a built-in Alpha 5 application server that you can use for testing. You can learn more about the server later on. For now, you just need to know that the server must be active for you to see your A5W pages in a browser. And when the button is green, like it is here, it's active. Now we'll go back to the HTML editor, and we'll execute the page by clicking this lightning bolt button over here. This lightning bolt button wasn't active before when the server was off. You need to have the server on for that option to appear. And we'll just go ahead and click it. And what it does is it publishes the files in your project to a local folder. And then it opens your default web browser. In this case, I'm running Google Chrome. And it shows the page. And as you can see, the page is fully functional. I can sort just by clicking on column names. I can adjust the number of records per page. And I can move from page to page just using the navigation controls here at the bottom. All of this is highly customizable, by the way. You can make it look exactly how you want it to look. Again, this is just an example. But at this point, we've done our very first simple web application, and it only took about 15 minutes. So let's go through a quick review of what we've learned. Then I'll show you some of the great reference materials out there to get you building robust, data-driven applications in Alpha 5 right away. Review. We used the Select Database screen to build a new workspace. A workspace is a folder on your hard drive and an ADB file, and collectively they keep your work organized. Because we're building a simple web application, we use the Web Projects Control Panel instead of just the Control Panel. We built a grid in Alpha 5 that connected to a SQL database to view and browse through our customer records. In the process of building this grid, we created a connection string that we can now use with other web components. Then we built an A5W page and put the component we built onto that page. and we activated the Alpha 5 application server. Finally, we executed the page and tested it out on our browser. So, where do we go from here? Well, there are many other videos as well as books available to you. There's also an Alpha 5 wiki, there's the message board, and we have professional services including mentoring, consulting, and even project management. To find out more about all of these options, just go to alphasoftware.com/help. I'm Dave McCormick, and on behalf of Alpha Software, thanks for watching.